Daniel Sports Central, we go for a college football bowl preview and prediction on the 2022 Citrus Bowl matchup between the Iowa Hawkeyes and the Kentucky Wildcats. One of the big matchups coming up here on New Year's Day. Both teams have had great seasons to this point. Should make for a good matchup in the Citrus Bowl. We'll be going over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today, starting out with your team trends. Iowa lost to Michigan in the Big Ten championship game. 42-3 was the final score there, so that was a brutal loss there for the Hawkeyes, and definitely a pretty forgettable game, I think, for most Hawkeye fans. But, I mean, down the stretch, Iowa, this has been a good football team all season long. This team got up to number 2 in the rankings at one point, and, of course, ever since, they've lost 3 games. But, I mean, Iowa, this is a good football team. Defensively, one of the best teams in the country. Offensively, kind of a different story. I mean, this Iowa team, if their offense was even slightly better, potentially the Hawkeyes are a big national contender right now, but nonetheless, they're 10-3, and it has still been a good season for the Hawkeyes. Kentucky beat Louisville 52-21 in the last game of the regular season. Good win for the Wildcats to finish out the regular season. They are 9-3 heading into this matchup, and both teams are ranked in the top 25. Iowa at number 15, Kentucky at number 22. Game will be on Saturday, January 1st in Orlando, Florida. Kickoff time 1 p.m. Eastern. Spread's going Kentucky here by 3. So the Wildcats are slightly favored in this matchup, which sort of makes sense. I mean, you got a very close matchup. Both teams very skilled and have had good seasons. But if you do look a little closer into Iowa here, I mean, Kentucky isn't really losing any key players to the NFL draft or injuries. But for Iowa here, Tyler Goodson, their top running back, over 1,100 yards on the season, 6 touchdowns. He will not be with this football team for this game. He is declared for the NFL draft. So that's going to be a brutal loss here for Iowa, and it kind of makes sense why Kentucky is slightly favored here. And there's a couple other factors at play. But over under 44 in your FPI is going Kentucky here, 52.8%. So just about as close as it gets there. And it's also the first matchup between these two teams in their histories. Here's your stat comparison for this game. Iowa 23 points a game, 19 points allowed, 177 pass yards a game, 119 rush yards. And then for yards allowed, 213 passing, 113 for rushing. So Iowa here, I mean, this is a football team that defensively, once again, they've been an excellent football team for the most part of the season. I mean, that Michigan game was kind of sloppy, allowing 42 points to them. But otherwise, I mean, this football team has played excellent, especially on the defensive side of the ball all season. So that's a key factor here. But offensively, though, once again, kind of a different story. 23 points a game is a pretty terrible stat line, pretty terrible average there. Spencer Petras, this team's quarterback, hasn't even thrown 10 touchdowns on the season. And Tyler Goodson, he's been the main talented player on this offense that's really actually carried them to a few wins. So, I mean, not having Tyler Goodson in this game is going to be a huge blow, I think, for Iowa. And I don't think many people really realize how impactful of a player. I mean, he's a signature player on this offense, and they're not going to have him in this game. And this is a huge situation for Iowa not having him. And Spencer Petras, I mean, he's going to have a huge game. Samuel Laporta, their top tight end, and top in receiving as well. He's got 550 yards on the season of receiving. He's going to have a huge game as well. But defensively, stats are good. Kentucky, 33 points a game, 22 points allowed, 225 passers a game, 206 rush yards. And then for yards allowed, he got 219 passing, 117 for rushing. So Kentucky here, I mean, offensively, this team has actually been pretty good over the course of the season. Several key players. Will Levis has had a good season for this football team, nearly 2,600 yards of passing. And, of course, you got Rodriguez, your top running back, over 1,200 yards on the season, 8 touchdowns. And then Wan'Dale Robinson, Nebraska transfer. He has had an outstanding season for the Wildcats, one of the best receivers in the SEC. He's had over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns on the season. So, Kentucky, there's a lot of talent on this offense, and it's going to be interesting to see how this Kentucky offense matches up to Iowa's defense. And, I mean, for Kentucky's defense is, I mean, I wouldn't say it's quite as good as Iowa's, but it's definitely gotten it done several times this season. So, lots of interesting matchups coming up here in this game. But looking at some recent matchups, Iowa lost to Michigan 3-42. Beat Nebraska, Illinois, Minnesota, and Northwestern down the stretch. So I mean, they didn't really play a major ranked football team before that Michigan game. So I mean, that was a big difference in the talent that they've been playing against. I mean, by the way, I mean, if you look at the regular season here, I mean, this football team only played. I mean, they played 3 ranked teams over the course of the season. Penn State and Iowa State are the 2 main ones, and they played Indiana back in week 1, who was actually ranked number 17, but turns out Indiana finished out the season at 2-10, so they're not a very good football team. But Iowa, I mean, their strength of schedule, considering they're in the Big Ten, they've probably got one of the easier schedules, I would say, in the Big Ten. I mean, there's I mean, over the course of the year, I mean, you've played Penn State. Penn State, that's the one signature win I would say for Iowa in this season. So their schedule, once again, considering they're in the Big Ten, it hasn't been too terribly difficult. But for Kentucky, I mean, down the stretch for them as well, they haven't played any signature opponents. I mean, they've beaten Louisville, beaten New Mexico State, Vanderbilt, lost to Tennessee by 3, lost to Mississippi State as well. I mean, they've beaten Florida, LSU, South Carolina. Those are your 3 main signature wins for Kentucky down the stretch, and they did take 3 losses there in the middle of October and into November, but otherwise this team has been pretty consistent for the most part. And I mean, even their schedule isn't terribly difficult considering the conference that they're in. I mean, Georgia, I think Georgia's the one. Well, actually, Mississippi State is ranked right now, but Georgia's the one other team that Kentucky has played that is currently ranked. So that's another very interesting thing to note here is, I mean, both schedules aren't terribly difficult considering their conferences. Some key points: Iowa defense is great. Offense has struggled over the course of the season. And something that I didn't mention before, I mean, Spencer Petras, of course, has been the primary starting quarterback, but over the past month or so, we have seen a little bit of Alex Padilla. He's played a little bit, but he hasn't really been too impressive. So, I mean, it's a tough quarterback situation for Iowa. And once again, this offense, if it could have been even slightly better, this football team could definitely be a national contender right now. I mean, their defense is good enough. It's just their offense which has been kind of holding them back. Tyler Goodson declared for the NFL draft. Once again, I would say he's the most talented player on this offense for sure. And that's, once again, just a brutal loss for this football team. But notable wins: Iowa State, Maryland, and Penn State, although the one signature win for them would be Penn State. Kentucky, 9-3, have a talented, balanced offense. I mean, rushing game, passing game has been good all season for Kentucky. Wan'Dale Robinson, Chris Rodriguez, both players have been major impact players. Will Levis, I mean, he's had a good season as well. Don't sleep on him. But, I mean, this offense has been playing well, and defensively they've had some very promising moments as well. But some notable wins for Kentucky, South Carolina, Florida, and LSU. So both teams, I mean, their records are very good, but both teams don't really have any major quality wins. I mean, Kentucky, Florida, they're not very good. LSU's not very good either. I mean, Iowa, on the flip side, at least they've beaten Penn State, who's pretty good, but turns out Penn State is 7-5. So, once again, it's kind of tough to analyze that. But that being said, let's get to the prediction here for Iowa and Kentucky in your Citrus Bowl coming up here on New Year's Day. I'm going to go Kentucky. Your 24-17 is my predicted final score, and this is a tough one. I mean, it's about as close as it gets. Both teams are extremely talented and have had good seasons for sure. And I mean, Kentucky, I'm going to give them the edge just because I trust more in their offense. I mean, Iowa couldn't get anything going against a good Michigan defense, and I mean, they only scored 3 points in the Big Ten title game, and I mean, against some pretty poor opponents. I mean, this team only scored 17 points against Northwestern. I mean, this offense is just not reliable defensively. Maybe they'll get it done, and I think it's going to be a lower scoring game for sure. I mean, there's no doubt this will be a lower scoring game, and I wouldn't be surprised a single bit if we saw the under 44 points. But I mean, Kentucky here, I just trust this team much more. They got more talent offensively. Iowa doesn't have Tyler Goodson in this game as well. That's their most talented player offensively for sure. So, I mean, for Iowa not having him, and Kentucky's got all their weapons offensively, I'm going to go with the Wildcats here, 24-17. Over-under 44. I'm going to take the under for this game. Pretty confident in that. Both teams definitely, I think. I think it's going to be kind of a defensive game. Kentucky potentially scores upwards of 30, but I mean, against an Iowa defense has been good this season. I mean, that's what's going to win the game here for Iowa is their defense. They need to hold Kentucky under 20 points if they want to win this game. I really do believe. I mean, it's going to be tough for Iowa to score more than 20. So, I mean, for Iowa's defense here, they got to play excellent in this entire game. But yeah, probability 55% towards Kentucky, and I do expect the Wildcats to cover as well. But that being said, let me know your thoughts and comments below on this game. And I appreciate you guys all watching as always. I got Wildcats here 24-17. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. I'll see you guys later.